Nuestra conferenciante de hoy es profesora titular de aquí de la Universidad Pública de Navarra, profesora titular desde el año 2011. Su formación, ella es licenciada en Economía por la Universidad de Carlos III de Madrid y doctora por la London School of Academics del Reino Unido. Bueno, tiene muchos premios, tiene muchas publicaciones, ha participado en multitud de congresos y una de sus últimas líneas de investigación está relacionada con energía atómica. Es también evaluadora de distintas agencias nacionales, en fin, pues es toda una investigadora a la que le agradecemos muchísimo que ella nos preste este tiempo de su agenda, que sabemos que siempre son complicadas, pues para impartir esta conferencia que nos cuente un poco pues esto de las utopias y distopías en el mundo de la economía. Pues Mar, cuando quieras. Muchas gracias.
Que ricasco, buenas tardes, good afternoon. Yes, indeed. I'm gonna try to tell in a little more than 40 minutes what I do, what is my field of expertise, and a little bit of how a historian like myself, an economist like myself, can actually look at the future. So that's the three parts of my presentation today. So first of all, myself, as has been introduced, my full name is María del Mar Rubio Varas, everybody call me Mar. Well, my students just call me La Historia, which is kind of fun because I'm not a historian, I'm an economist. An economist with first degree, and when I was studying economy, one of the things that I struggled most with was this idea of economics is a lot about modeling, but was very little about the real world. And the reason why I wanted to study economics was trying to understand why there were rich countries and poor countries, and why some countries achieve higher standard of living than other countries. And I didn't quite get that on my economics degree. So I wanted to do something more related to the real world, something closer to development economics, if you wish. And that's how I ended up at the LSE, at the London School of Economics, where I did a master's degree in development, actually in the history of development, and how I got interested in economic history. I finished my PhD at the LSE, and then from there I went 1 year to Berkeley in the United States, where I continued to study basically these businesses about long-term and economic history and all of that. Then I got back to Spain, and I started teaching at Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona for 3 years before I actually joined here the Public University of Navarra in 2008. And that's what I've been doing basically since there, almost for 10 years now. I teach here economic history. I teach here in English to the international groups, both to economics, the business, and the double degrees. And the first thing that I have to do for you is try to explain what it is, this thing of economic history, and what economic history actually means, okay? Because economic history basically is a hybrid. It's half economics and it's half history. And in fact, among the economic historians, I'm a little bit weird because I'm an economist, and most of my colleagues happen to be historians. What it takes from each of these fields. Economic history is history, but it's not history in the sense of telling the past on the facts of what happened one after the next. It's history, but it's history particularly about the things that have to do with countries and with how we provide wealth and how we increase that wealth and how we produce and how the different systems of production have changed over time. The major objective of looking into those kind of things in the past are normally countries, but also we do businesses. I will try to explain that later. And the main difference probably with economic historians, with historians proper, is that we have a lot of interest in numbers. We look a lot for quantitative evidence of how much was produced, or how much did it cost, who traded with whom, how much energy cost to move things around. So we are a particular kind of historian that actually look for evidence on the numbers, quantitative evidence. And that set us apart from the most part of the historians, that they're more about the facts and what happened, and very much little about reconstructing the numbers or the quantities of things. With respect to economics, we share the theoretical background. I know that now in the bachelor's here, on your high school, you have economics as one of your subjects. So I know you're familiar with some of the topics of economics, and I know you do some macro and some micro, and you have some stories about supplies and demands. So the basic theory body of economics, we take it in economic history, but we try to see whether that theoretical background actually works in the real world, and actually whether it worked in the real world in the past. Because one thing that happened with models is that they might work in the abstract, or they might work for a particular country in a particular period, but that might not necessarily imply that the model is universal, that applied on the whole history of humanity in every single country at every single time. So in that sense, we share the whole theoretical body of economics, but we are different from economists in two particular kind of things. On the first thing is that we are very concerned with change. We want to know when change happened and why. And that's very different from economics, because economics tend to go for the steady state, for displaying how things got to be and how they are, but not how they changed to get there. And we want to know when change happened and how change happened. And that's a crucial difference. The other is that economic historians, we tend to focus on the long run. And what is that? Well, for an economist, particularly if you're a financial economist, the long run is just today. And if you're a financial economist, 1 hour ago is a long time ago. If you're an economic historian, 50 years, a century, even a millennium, is the amount of time in which you can actually see change happen, okay? And in that sense, with economists, we distinguish ourselves because we historians tend to look at things that happened minimum 25 years ago. And as a friend of mine said, anything that happened in my lifetime is not history, okay? And he's 81 years old. So anything that happened in the 19th century is history, nothing after. But that long run thing is what makes the biggest difference of economists with economic historians. Then economic historians, we're a kind of a species in extinction. There are very few of us out there. Most universities in Spain keep one economic historian and most two. In the United States, now in total there might be 50 in all of the universities of the United States together. Because either they are historians or economists, but not economic historians, which I think is a shame for the profession. So now that we know a little bit what economic history is about, what kind of things actually are of interest to people like me, to economic historians, what kind of things we study? Well, I was saying, basically everything that interests economists, but in the very long run. So, starting with the standard of welfare state, of how people live, whether they are happier or less happy, whether they have access to basic needs or they don't. That's something that economic historians actually look for and try to measure whether that has changed over time, has improved or not, okay? One very basic stuff that economic historians started doing from the beginning of the profession was actually measuring population growth. Because if a country can actually feed its population and provide sufficient food for the population, basically imply that population can do something else apart from producing food. So observing the evolution of population is one of the things that actually economic historians have been doing since the very beginning. Of course, once the economics as a field develop over time, and we have other vocabulary on macroeconomic variables, and we have things like the gross domestic product, the GDP, and we have inflation, and we have unemployment, and these other measures, we economic historians try to look at that into history and try to see how that evolved over time. How was the unemployment of the 19th century? And how were the prices? And all of that is crucial to what we do and how we explain the past. And some of the things I'm going to show you later actually comes from those reconstructions. One other aspect that is crucial to what economic historians do, very related to the second part of my talk today, is technological change. The evolution of humankind and the fact that actually we go richer and live better than our ancestors is, for the most part, due to the fact that we have better technology. And one of the things that we actually don't know, and it will be crucial to understand, is how technological change happens, when crucial developments happen, and why some countries seem to be more proud to have that technological change happening from other countries. Why some countries seem to be stagnated in the Stone Age, and some other countries are able to put men in the moon. And that's a very important thing. Related to all of this, obviously, is the whole of the production and consumption of goods and services. We don't produce today the same things that we produced a century or 2 centuries ago. In fact, most of the things that you can see in this room, most of the clothes that you wear today, most of the things that you have in your hands or your pockets, couldn't be produced a century ago because the materials didn't exist, nor the technology. Same happened with services. There are services that we have today that are kind of normal to our daily lives, and they have only appeared very recently. Understanding how that happened and how that changed and how that contributes to technological change, to the growth of the GDP, to the welfare of the people, is the kind of things that actually we're interested at as well. Prices, I mentioned that before, I mentioned inflation before, but money wasn't always there. And now that we are maybe moving into something like the Bitcoin and electronic currencies, people actually start to wonder, okay, what is money and when money was created? Well, money is something that started to work in China some centuries before Christ, but Europeans started to use paper money much later. Trying to understand what is the role of money in the economy and what would it mean to have a moneyless economy or a cashless economy is one of the things we do in economic history as well. I told you we're interested in change, and one of the things that also bring change is people and things and goods moving around. So the international movement of people, cash, and trade is one of the other core issues of economic history. The movement of goods is called international trade, the movement of people is called migration, and the movement of capital is basically international financial capital. But the thing there is how that happened. I mean, had always people had the ability to change from one country to another or not? Had the goods and services had the ability to change country? Can countries negotiate or trade among themselves? And what is good and what is bad about that thing? And all of that also interests economic historians quite a bit. Employment and unemployment, which is the same thing and is related to the next one, and is related to the things I was mentioning before. If we don't produce the same things and we don't produce the same services, that basically imply the people that are employed producing those goods and services also have changed how they make their living. Most of the employments that your family have today, most of the employments that your parents have today, again, didn't exist 100 years ago. 100 years ago, 90% of you, probably your family will have been in the agricultural sector, producing food, basic food. And that was it. And maybe 1 or 2 of you might be doing something else. That had changed, and have changed very rapidly over the 20th century. But we want to observe that over time and how it had changed. And that's one of the things we also do. And the role of government, which we give for granted. The government is there and produces links for us and provides scholarships and gives grants, places like this one, or health or stuff like that. But again, governments weren't always there, and governments were not always there producing economic goods. So when that had happened, and when and how some countries have governments that provide goods and services and other countries don't, is one of the other things that some of my colleagues in economic history do as well. And something that gets very often confused with economic history, or what I do, is the history of economic thought, which is just a branch, which is studying economics and how economics have changed over time as a science. The history of economic thought is just a branch of that. It's much more philosophical, if you wish. It's trying to understand how economists have thought about the economy, how have they changed their models, how have they just questioned things and provide solutions in their theoretical models over time, and how have that changed. And sometimes to understand how policy work, you need to understand what was the economic thought at that time, what was known, what was in the textbooks of economics at the time. So we sometimes also, in the classes of economic history, we need a little bit of economic thought as well. And there is another branch of economic history as well, which is just the evolution of the firm, of the companies, which is basically business history. when we start having multinationals. They have always been multinationals out there. What is the shape and the size of companies, and how had that changed over time, and why it seems that some countries send one particular kind of companies and other countries don't have that type of companies. And that bit of business history is a field of itself. And in fact, here at the Pública de Navarra, we have two distinct subjects, one for economic history, one for business history, because these two are different animals, and we actually treat them differently. And having said all this, and about all the wide number of topics that interest economic historians, why did I choose a topic for today for you that is actually called the next world? It's talking about the future. And I'm telling you, I'm an economic historian looking at the past. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring that topic today is because I'm very convinced that history can help us to understand what is coming next. And I'm not alone on this. In fact, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Britain during the Second World War, already said this: the farther you look, the farther back you can look, the further forward you're likely to see. The more history you know, the more you know where you're coming from, the better you understand where you stand and the options you have in the future. And I think that's crucial for me as an economic historian to explain to you as the young generations, because typically history is one of those topics I think people tend to believe that is basically useless. And I'm convinced that many of the problems that we have currently in the world, in policy and economics, is simply because of the lack of an historical perspective, both of the politicians and of the population in general. And that's why I choose a topic about the future, even though I'm an economic historian. And what I intend to do today, I mean, my key point today, and on the second part of my talk, is basically telling you where we are, looking at the very long run in economic terms, and presenting to you the two visions of the future that are the most opposite possible among the ones that the economic fields are putting in front of us. And then if you want, at the end we can have a little talk about how would you think where the world is going, because at the end of the world, it's your world. I mean, I will be very old in 50 years or 60 years, but it will be your world. So which one of the two I'm gonna give you, actually you would like to have. So let me tell you one thing first. You might not be aware of this, but we live in a very privileged moment of history. It's a very privileged moment of history because basically none of our ancestors have ever had access to so much food, medicine, health, goods and services as we have today. Doesn't matter where you look at, whether you look at infant mortality, whether you look at education, whether you look at democracy, doesn't really matter. This is the time in which humanity have had more access to goods, services, and welfare in the whole history of the humankind. There is plenty of things to do yet. There is hunger in the world, there is poverty in the world, there is all kinds of troubles. But it's been reducing slowly over the last 50 years, and it's actually reducing relatively fast, okay? And even in things that you might not believe, such as war, we actually live in a privileged moment in history. I know that with everything that is happening on the news and the Koreans wanting to just, send missiles and the terrorist attacks and stuff, you might feel that you are living in a very violent moment of history. But let me show you the numbers. We actually live in the point of history in which less violent deaths are taking place in the world, less wars, and most of the world population lives in peace. Both in absolute numbers, total population that live in peace, and in relative numbers, share of the world population that live peace, okay? In Europe in particular, we are for the first time having 2 generations in a row not knowing war on first person, not having lived through a war. That had never, ever happened in Europe since we have records, okay? So we have to be aware of that privileged position in which we live, because it seems like, given everything that we have been given, everything is just going wrong. And I think that we will have to persuade ourselves is that the point is, where are we going from here? If humanity has reached objectively its best possible time ever, are we going to go down the drain, or are we going to go upwards to a better future still? And that's kind of what I bring here today. The two utopias or dystopias, depending on which part of the world you stand, that take the two extremes of what the future might bring. Let me just give you the definition of an utopia, because basically utopias are an idealized project of the world. It's perfect in a sense. It's an ideal society, but by definition, an utopia is unachievable. It's basically your dream world. And by contrast, a dystopia is when everything goes wrong, and it's like your nightmare on society. But by definition, both are an invention of the mind, if you wish. It's not something that is going to happen, it's something that you imagine it might happen. That in the case of the utopia, you just put it as the best possible scenario, and in the case of the dystopias, it's simply the worst possible scenario. Okay? And I'm going to give you two of those, and I insist I won't name them, because for some people the first one I'm going to give you is an utopia, but for some other people it's also a dystopia, and the other way around. Or some people in the room, and when I give this talk as well, find that my second option is actually the best possible one, and other people just find it completely dystopical. So let me just try to give you these two ways of the world. Let me start for the first one. You probably don't realize, because you're too young, and you have already been born on the era of the internet and the mobile telephone, and for you has always been here. But one of the interesting things that as economic historians we can tell you is that the world is accelerating. The pace of technological change has increased incredibly. Let me give you some examples that are there at the top, and the number one. Humanity took a first leap in the technological realm, going from being hunter-gatherers, having to just hunt for your food, to be able to farm the land, the agricultural revolution. Okay? We were able to settle in a place and grow our food. Okay? Well, from that item that was kind of technological advance to the next big item that is industrial revolution, it took more than 2,000 or 3,000 years. Okay? So if you think of it for a second, Napoleon had the same technology that the Romans had. Had Napoleon had to travel from Paris to Madrid, it will take him exactly the same time that would have taken the Roman Empire. Because not many changes had taken place in technology in all those 2,000 years. From the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century to the next big leap in change that you might consider electricity, okay, the light bulb, there is only 150 years. Okay? From the light bulb to the next big item on the agenda of humanity, that might be, if you wish, landing on the moon, it only took 90 years. But from landing on the moon to the World Wide Web, which is the predecessor of the internet, it's only 22 years. And from that to the sequencing of the genome, it's 9 years. So the pace at which humankind has been able to create things that change humanity forever had accelerated, particularly over the last 150 years. There is one thing in which this is more obvious, and that probably you relate to this much more, which is computer science. If there is one aspect in which technology has been flying, has been the power to compute in computer science. The amount of time it took to double the power of computing, it took 90 years, okay, to double the power of the first computers, okay? In the time we are going to be sitting here today, in about 1 hour, it's gonna double again. This is how fast it goes, okay? And that amount of computing and that amount of handling data, of being able to analyze data, is basically one of the things that have been able to evolve into new forms and new technologies that might change humanity forever. And it's what we call singularities, okay? What's a technological singularity? A technological singularity is an event that whenever occurs, it changes the path of humanity forever. You can think of electricity as a singularity. The world before and after electricity is a complete different world. Internet is a singularity as well. The world before and after instant communication is a complete different world. Now, there are plenty of singularities ahead of us that we cannot even imagine, because the world changed so much after it that you cannot think about it. I mean, you cannot ask anybody in the 18th century how will be the world with electricity, because how will you explain today what the electricity was? Well, you can tell them, well, you can have electric light at night, a candle. It's not quite like that. Okay? So that's a singularity. A type of technological breakthrough that changed life forever. And the thing that I'm trying to tell you is that we're having more of those singular events as we speak. And we are having them more often than we used to have them. And there are a few branches of sciences, of technologies, in which we actually can see this exponential kind of growth, this approach towards singularity. We can see that in artificial intelligence and robotics, in which robots are able to do things that we never thought possible. We were having a talk the other day in which one of the experts here of artificial intelligence said, if you have asked me 6 months ago whether it was possible for a computer to have feelings, I would have told you it was impossible. But now, maybe, because 6 months now, the things that have been happening in the last 6 months have changed everything completely. It has happened also in biotechnology, in all the advances of create life, on adaptations of life, things that we were thinking, the technology and life, and how those two things can be integrated. In nanotechnology and digital fabrication, the capacity to build things that are smaller every time. We are reaching the point of getting to atomic level computing, for instance. And networks in computer systems and everything that has to do with big data and the analysis of data. All of these topics basically are willing, able, and capable of creating singularities. And if you think of the combination of those, of having computers with artificial intelligence or having computers with biotechnology, which is perfectly possible, you can imagine all kinds of singularities there. If you believe all of this, then you see where I'm going. Then I'm going to a world in which humans might eventually be part humans, part machines, and we have something that they call the transhumans, that kind of the cyborgs of the old times. But also a world in which mostly every other problem could be solved by technology, and growth could kind of happen forever, and that's why they call it exponential growth. That's part of the first utopia or dystopia, depending on how you take on technology. Because on the other stream of the ideological or intellectual realm, you have all those people that tell you, well, in a finite world like ours, anybody that thinks that growth can be exponential and forever is either a fool or an economist. Why will I say that? And then I'll take you to some of the things I do for research. I told you I'm an economic historian. And within economic history, the thing that I do is basically energy. I reconstruct energy consumption of different countries in different times and wonder how energy consumption can change. On the very long run, something like that will be. I mean, the advance of humanity that I have shown you 2 slides up is very deeply ingrained and related to the consumption of energy, which have been increasing exponentially, in fact. Particularly over the last 150 years. Today, we consume 1,000 times more energy per capita than the humanity have ever consumed historically. And, well, that's the way of looking at it, the global energy consumption. But also, we consume it in a very unequal way. I mean, 70% of the world population consume a third of the world population consumes 70%, we consume 70% of the energy, while 2/3 of humanity just have to do with the rest. You can think of that in terms of about almost 60% of the world population has access to electricity. I told you electricity is a singularity, but not everybody in the world has access to electricity. So the point is that, yes, you might have the discoveries, but if the discoveries don't reach the population in the form of innovation, you might not have that advance. The problem with these requirements of energy, and I'm sure you are all aware of this because the younger generations are more aware of this, is that energy consumption had created a problem with the atmosphere. We had basically created so much gases out there that we are warming the planet. And even if you doubt some of the data that some of the climatologists are giving you, I provide to you some evidence that I think very compelling. This is the week of the year in which the cherry trees blossom in Kyoto, in Japan. They have data since the year 800, so again, history matters. And typically the cherries, they tend to be blossoming anywhere between the 1st and the 20th of April. The question is that for the last 50 years, the cherry blossoms in Japan have been just blossoming earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier, up to 2 weeks earlier. You might twist the data and grow on warming, but you cannot convince the trees to blossom 2 weeks before. Something is happening to the climate on the planet. It's definitely warming up, and that basically implies that all forms of production had some serious limits, both on the amount of gases we are putting out there and in the other limits that might have in other forms of resources or in water or any other. Other way of looking at this is from this other way of understanding the world. The people doing some calculus are basically saying that today we are consuming the resources of about 1.5 planets. So basically over-consuming the resources of the planet, and that goes for water, but that goes for energy resources, but might go for copper or any of the other minerals in the planet. If we keep on this growth path, this way of thinking provides, we will need probably 3 Earths in the year 250. And what they propose is that given that we cannot keep consuming at this space because the amount of things in the world are limited, the thing they propose is basically degrowing. We have to consume less, we have to consume more efficiently in order to be able to go forward. And in fact, what they propose is we don't need to grow. We actually can degrow. We can split things that are among the whole population of the planet. So we don't need to just degrade the planet even further. Now, between these two visions of the world, one that is ultra optimism about the technological progress of the planet, and the other that is super pessimistic and actually provides that we go back to our roots and to nature, what is my stand as an economic historian? Well, one thing that is interesting about being an economic historian is that you can actually look at what were the utopias and dystopias that people were putting on the table before. And one of the things I learned about utopias and dystopias is that even if they don't happen because they are not supposed to happen, they are ideal, they inform where we are going to. Let me give you an example. In the 19th century, some people had a dream about how society had to be organized, and they proposed that people have to work less than 8 hours a day and have a weekend rest and have some insurance from the life. And you think it's like, that's normal, we just work 8 hours. Yeah, in the 19th century, believe me, when they proposed this, they thought of themselves as idealistics of the people that are proposing here in transhumance or degrowth. Because it was completely utopic on the 19th century to think of that. So, having said that, of these two opposite views of the future, what I think might probably happen is that some of the proposals will actually happen on both sides. I actually think that technology will advance to points that we can actually not recognize today. And I think that some of that technology will actually help with the other part of having to consume less, because we will have to consume less and more efficiently. And maybe those two eventually will have to go hand in hand for the world to come forward. I don't believe that any of the two will actually happen, neither the technological nor the degrowth by themselves. I think some middle ground will actually happen in the future, as it happened with utopias and dystopias of the past. And that was basically what I had for you today. I hope that you get a little bit of a message of what economic history does. And if you ever want to do anything of that, well, here we are. I will continue to be here probably doing economic history.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
O no, pero mi inglés es estupendo. Preguntas o que tengan que estén relacionadas más o menos, ¿no? Con...
¿O qué creen que va a pasar?
Sí.
Es vuestro mundo, no es mío. En 2100 yo no estaré. Vosotros igual sí.
Sí.
La esperanza de vida de las mujeres está por encima de los 27 años ya, por lo cual estaréis llegando.
España es el segundo país, ¿no? Después de Japón.
Efectivamente.
Más,
más las chicas.
Sí, las mujeres todavía más que los hombres, o sea que...
¿En cuál de los dos mundos os veis? ¿En el tecnológico o en el más verde y consumo menos? Pues ahí iremos, porque dependerá de lo que decida vuestra generación.
Sí, pero yo no sé si lo que es tan fácil, porque parece que estamos todos como muy acostumbrados a cosas en las que cada vez el consumo energético es más potente y creo que cuesta renunciar, ¿no?
Cuesta muchísimo.
Cuesta mucho renunciar. Entonces yo no sé si se llegará, o sea, si se llegará a un punto en que se disminuya esa capacidad de renuncia para que seamos capaces, ¿no? Porque ahora mismo vosotros vais andando a todos los sitios, en bicicleta.
Nunca cogen el coche.
No cogéis coche, o sea, digo que nos hemos acostumbrado a una vida, ¿no?
Pagar las luces de la habitación todos los días.
La calefacción, ahora, hombre, a uno le dicen que tiene pasar invierno sin calefacción, cuando nosotros éramos pequeños.
Y sin aire acondicionado.
Sin aire acondicionado. Ahora entras en un sitio en verano y no hay aire acondicionado y te quejas.
Exactamente.
Entonces, yo, ¿hasta qué punto esto? O sea, yo sí que soy un poco escéptica, de que yo tampoco lo veré nada.
No, pero me gusta que su respuesta sea esa, porque finalmente el camino se irá haciendo andando.
O sea, es complicado, ¿no? Al final, la tecnología es ahora mismo lo que más nos rodea, es tener que pasar, bueno, o sea, por decirlo de una manera, tener que pasar la tecnología es un poco complicado. Al final...
Siempre puedes pensar que la tecnología te ayude en ese camino de reducir el consumo energético, mejores tecnologías. En esta casa se están empezando a hacer cosas que utilizan energía residual, que son capaces de funcionar con la vibración del ambiente. Ya me parecen absolutamente maravillosas. ¿Alguien quiere ser economista? ¿Sabéis qué hacen los economistas? Lo que voy a preguntar es qué hacen los economistas. ¿Qué hacen los economistas? Los economistas fundamentalmente se dedican a tratar de entender las variables macroeconómicas y tomar las decisiones. O sea, en realidad ellos no toman decisiones. Los economistas se dedican a tratar de influenciar la decisión política, o bien de las empresas o bien de los países. Es más un papel de advisor, es la palabra en inglés, consejeros, en esa dirección. Entonces, los economistas, si me preguntáis dónde trabajan la gente que estudió conmigo economía, unos pocos, bastantes en gobierno, Banco de España, ministerios, industria, comercio, turismo, medio ambiente, algunos pocos en empresas, en grandes empresas, porque en general las multinacionales sí que tienden a contratar economistas, no así las pequeñas empresas que cogen más gente de empresa. O sea, una duda que tiene mucha gente cuando viene a la universidad es elegir economía o empresa. Yo tenía un profesor que durante toda la carrera me dijo change to ladder, o sea, cámbiate a empresa. Y yo, no, estoy muy contenta en economía. Pero sí es verdad que para empresa pequeña se hace más empresa que economía. Y una parte pequeña de mis compañeros, pero sobre todo los que ya estudiaron más el doctorado conmigo, están en organismos internacionales, en el Banco Mundial, en cosas más a ese nivel, pero de nuevo en ese papel de escribir informes, de trabajar ahí.
Pero realmente se aprende del pasado, digo, porque por ejemplo la crisis que hemos sufrido ahora, ¿no? La crisis del ladrillo hace unos años y tal, y pues hace unos días leí que otra vez se está organizando, bueno, atisbaba como decir, bueno, no sé, otra vez parece que empezamos otra vez el mismo camino, y digo, hombre, pues tampoco es que miremos 300 años hacia atrás, ha pasado hace menos de una década. y volvemos a tropezar en la misma piedra. O sea,
hay un sí y hay un no a esa respuesta.
Ese análisis del pasado.
Está la respuesta negativa del no nos hacen caso. O sea, la cuestión está de que el historiador es aquel que tiene que ver a todos los demás repetir los errores todo el rato. Pero sí es verdad que en términos económicos, por ejemplo, la crisis de 2007 es un buen ejemplo de cómo la historia económica sirvió, porque se evitaron muchos de los grandes errores que se habían cometido en la crisis de los años 30. Una de las cosas que nos salvó de que la crisis fuera menos grave de lo que fue es que Bernanke, que era el presidente de la Reserva Federal en Estados Unidos, era un grandísimo experto en la Gran Depresión, y entonces entendió todo lo que no tenía que hacer. Y entonces se hizo el rescate bancario, convenció a todos los países que no cerraran el comercio, digamos, todos los grandes errores que hemos ido explicando que se habían producido entre los años 30 y los años 40, que nos llevan a la Segunda Guerra Mundial. El hecho de que las lecciones de la Gran Depresión se tomaran hicieron que la crisis de 2007 fuera menos grave de lo que hubiera sido si no hubiéramos sabido todo eso a nivel económico. O sea, si los economistas no hubieran tenido las lecciones del pasado. Habiendo dicho eso, somos, en particular en este país, muy reacios a aprender de la historia. Y la historia en general, una de las cosas que a mí me pasa como historiadora económica es que trato de esconder la palabra historia en todo lo que hago. Entonces soy economista de largo plazo o soy economista del siglo XX, pero no digo que soy historiador económico. Porque en el momento que pongas historia, te han descartado. Exacto, tú no eres relevante, ¿no? Entonces, en las cosas que hago de energía también me pasa. Cuando, sin embargo, para los temas energéticos que son de larguísimo plazo, es muy, muy relevante. Tenemos esa cosa de la historia es una asignatura María en los institutos, en los colegios, en la uni, y no se entiende ese papel que tiene la historia, que históricamente todos los grandes gobernantes tenían un historiador como consejero. Hasta los años 60 todos los gobiernos tenían un historiador de cabecera.
Sí, porque al final es que se aprende, o sea, que al final es difícil encontrarse con cosas muy, muy, muy novedosas, ¿no? Siempre hay fondos que se repiten a lo largo de la historia.
Y errores que no quiero repetir. Entonces, bueno, pues ya está. Yo pregunto si quiere haber alguien que quiere ser historiador, porque economista puede que haya alguno, pero historiador imagino que no.
¿Y qué tiene que ver un economista con la bolsa?
Buena pregunta. En general la bolsa, la gente que acaba trabajando en bolsa es gente que viene seguramente de matemáticas más que de economía o de empresa. Porque la bolsa se acaba de convertir en una cosa que se parece mucho a un casino. Tiene relativamente poca relación con la economía real, con los fundamentales, con los valores de las empresas, que es lo que estudiamos los economistas y la gente de empresa. Y la bolsa se acaba de convertir en algo en que los números, los algoritmos y las matemáticas mandan mucho. Y de hecho las grandes firmas financieras, los grandes bancos, emplean a más gente de física y de matemáticas que economistas o gente de empresa. Nosotros lo que nos dedicamos es tratar de explicar que eso no debería ser así, que el papel de la bolsa era otro, que era conseguir financiación para las empresas. Pero eso ha cambiado muchísimo últimamente. Y de hecho parte de las cosas que nos pasan en macroeconomía tiene que ver con que la bolsa, que tendría que ser fundamentalmente las empresas que tienen valor y que tienen capacidad de crecimiento, tendrían que ser las que los inversores quisieran comprar. Ahora no es así, es más, insisto, es más un casino global de apuestas y la última vez que leí algo sobre esto, las máquinas, lo que llaman el fast trading, que hacen operaciones en segundos sin que ningún humano controle, está controlando ya casi el 60% de las operaciones de bolsa del mundo, con lo cual ni economistas ni empresa. Informáticos. Pero es muy buena pregunta.
¿Qué es la economía circular?
Hay dos o tres versiones de la economía circular. Cuando yo estudiaba, lo que nos explicaban de la economía circular es la idea esta de que la economía, todo fluye, finalmente. Lo que tú produces es lo que alguien consume y lo que ese otro alguien consume, finalmente lo ha producido un tercero, de manera que el dinero fluye, ¿vale? Ahí se han incluido después, con el tiempo, visiones que vienen del lado de los ecologistas, en que en la economía circular entran todo lo que son recursos físicos. Es decir, para que tú produzcas algo ya no solo que necesitas unos inputs económicos, sino necesitas un territorio, necesitas una energía, necesitas unos materiales que además luego vas a contaminar a tu vez, de manera que todo está relacionado, ¿de acuerdo? Y entonces tiende más a verse en ese sentido de la limitación. Más recientemente se ha ido también todavía evolucionando más a cosas que tienen que ver con cosas de sociedad y con cómo organizarnos alrededor. Es un concepto que ha ido variando en el tiempo, de economía circular. Y ahora estamos más en cosas que tienen que ver con economía colaborativa y bastante relacionadas con las cosas de crecimiento. ¿Hacéis economía en el ISTI? No. ¿No? Sí, no. Que quiero saber qué os enseñan en el ISTI. Los de letras sí, los de ciencias no. Es que no sé, yo cuando estaba en el instituto no se hacía economía, por eso tengo gran curiosidad por saber si hacéis eco o no, o empresa, o cosas así.
En tercero, si no hay importes, sí.
Vale. Pues tendré que buscar a un profesor de instituto que me explique qué os explican. Para saber cuánto sabéis cuando lleguéis aquí.
En el mundo de la economía, otras profesiones tipo, incluso filósofos, tienen cabida porque hubo un momento que, o bueno, se decía que en grandes empresas se contrataban como colectivos pues a gente como humanista, ¿no? No sé exactamente filósofo, pero como humanista para, bueno, tener esa otra visión de una economía más encuadrada en una sociedad. Bueno, no sé, que, o sea, porque también, a ver, cuando uno piensa en un economista, si tú te vas a una escuela de negocios y haces un curso de este tipo, pues parece que casi lo único importante es apuntar resultados y el porcentaje de beneficio, ¿no? Esto quizá ahora esté ya un poco contrarrestado, pues precisamente con las crisis y tal, también con una visión un poco más de sensibilización pues hacia un mundo más sostenible, etcétera, que ahí pues tienes que gastar en otras cosas y entonces el beneficio ya a lo mejor no tiene que ser tanto y tal. Pero bueno, digo, en definitiva, o sea, sigue mandando...
Sigue mandándose. En realidad lo que pasa es que las facultades de economía y de empresa tendemos mucho todavía a lo que es la economía tradicional. Sí que empiezan a haber cosas, preguntaba él por la economía circular, de economía colaborativa, de economías del crecimiento, pero en realidad son muy en los márgenes. Y sí que es verdad que las empresas, en parte forzadas por la sociedad y por las preocupaciones de la gente, empiezan a tener esa otra parte de versión corporativa, de responsabilidad social, en la que casi nunca van a emplear economistas, porque los economistas tienen esta otra manera, o economistas o gente de empresa, pues, efectivamente no tienen esa visión de responsabilidad social, pero sin embargo entre mis alumnos sí que lo veo. Cuando les dejas elegir temas de trabajos de fin de grado y demás, sí que tienen esa preocupación por estos otros aspectos de sostenibilidad, de responsabilidad social, de desarrollo de igualdad, etcétera, que probablemente no han visto en clase y que les preocupa a ellos, pero que no han sido capaces de desarrollar en los años de la carrera. Esa es una cosa que igual nosotros, desde las universidades, tendríamos que ver, ¿no?
Sí, porque bueno, eso está bien, ¿no? Es una forma, un poco lo hacemos como de antes, ¿no? A lo mejor no hay que crecer y solo por crecer y porcentaje de beneficio, pues el año pasado fue 1, este año tiene que ser 1,2, el año tiene que ser 1,5 y el año que tiene que ser 1,8. Oiga, ¿qué pasa si es 0,5? Y vivimos más tranquilos y ponemos guarderías para nuestros y hacemos la conciliación familiar y tenemos sensibilidad para contratar a gente con otras capacidades, aunque sean más lentos, aunque sean menos eficientes.
Sí,
o sea, todo esto, al final, yo
¿es
no
para
sé,
qué?
Digo, claro, al final, ¿no?
Sí, no, pero eso me parece que por un lado está lo que enseñamos en la escuela y lo que está en los libros de economía y de empresa, y por otro está la preocupación de las nuevas generaciones y cómo ven ellos su futuro, y muchas veces ellos están prefiriendo trabajar 4 horas y con esas 4 horas poder hacer su vida tranquilamente y no aspiran al y más y más. Y yo creo que esa mentalidad, ese cambio de mentalidad es necesario para equilibrar estas cosas. Pero esto va a depender de vosotros.
No sé vosotros cómo lo veis.
Potenciales ingenieros en la sala. Necesitamos muchos y buenos de materiales y de ingeniería, energía, eléctricos. Todo eso va a cambiar el mundo. Se han dado todas las 4 salidas exponenciales. Todo eso va a tener trabajo, seguro.
Bueno, poco habladores estáis, ¿eh? ¿No tenéis más cuestiones? ¿No? Oye, pues nada, pues lo dejamos. Oye, pues muchísimas gracias.
A vosotros.